Good evening, everybody. I'd just like to introduce the program tonight. My name is Stephen Hillier. I'm the director of the Architecture Archive here at Cooper Union. And I want to thank you all for attending the lecture by Daniel Roche and Zara Pfeifer on the subject of cooperative housing, which is, of course, themed to the exhibition that we have in our hallway gallery right now. Thank you, Herman Jessor. I'm going to start with some brief information about Herman Jessor, who was a 1917 Cooper Union engineering graduate who actually started to come to night school here when he was still in high school. He subsequently began working as an architect and designed more than 40,000 units of cooperative housing through his 60-year career, accounting for 11% of New York City's total supply of cooperative housing. These units are across some 250 buildings in the Bronx, Queens, Manhattan, and Brooklyn. They include Co-op City, Penn South, Seward Park, Start City, and others. Over the course of his career, Jessor would become an internationally recognized authority on public housing. And in 1976, the Cooper Union's Board of Trustees acknowledged his professional achievements through a citation that he was given, which was the school's highest honor. So we're really happy to have the exhibition here on a number of levels. This exhibition also marks the first public display of the work by curators Daniel Roche, Zara Pfeifer, and Brad Isnard, who have spent the past 2 years documenting Jessor's output here in New York. And that's not just photography. That also means going to these housing estates, meeting people, network building, and also reaching out to organizations that support cooperative housing. Curators describe their effort as both a historical project and a timely political one, given the growing housing crisis in New York City. Politicians are actually now looking at revisiting United Housing Foundation, which was Jessor's client, and the Mitchell-Lama program, which created thousands of affordable subsidized homes. So they're looking to really regenerate the discussion, and I think they've been doing it in a really interesting way. And although we have a very modest third floor hallway gallery, I can tell you that we've had a ton of traffic come through the exhibition, which has been really nice. Yeah. And I also wanted to quote something that Zara wrote that I think we're going to hear a lot about tonight, which is that these buildings embody the full spectrum of the modern movement, but also a forlorn approach to housing when homes weren't considered commodities, but rather a universal human right. So a little information about Zara. She's a photographer based in Berlin and Vienna. Her work focuses on the social phenomena of large-scale infrastructure. So she's documented the modernist housing project Alt-Erlaa from 2013 to 2017, and then also a series on truck drivers from 2018 to 2022. And her work really involves extended periods of immersion in the daily lives of her subjects. And I think you clearly see that in the photographs that are in the exhibition here. And it's one of the things that I really appreciate about them is that you don't just get the architecture, you get to understand the people, you understand how they live together and how they live separately. And it's kind of very beautifully caught. And I would also say Dan is the news editor at the Architects newspaper. He teaches at Parsons and is co-authoring a new book, Anti-Fascist Architecture. His writing has been featured in eFlux, Brooklyn Rail, Flat, Pigeon, Architect Magazine, the New York Review of Architecture, and Common Edge. We're going to take a few questions after the lecture, but we have a reception planned. And so we thought we would spill out into the hallway, have something to drink, have something to eat, and then, you all can be in conversation with our curators here to ask them directly about their work. And I want to acknowledge and welcome some members of the Jessor family who are here tonight. Mr. Jessor's nephew, Richard Jessor, his wife, Jane Mencken, his great niece, Kim Jessor, and if I understand correctly, there is a great-grandnephew here and a great-great-grandnephew. So that's a lot of family members coming to support the cause, and I really appreciate that you're here. Also wanted to extend thanks to everybody who's here who lives in a Jessor-designed housing project here in New York City. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Zara and Dan.
Thank you.
Thank you. Zara will speak very quickly momentarily about the amazing photography work
that she's been doing the past 2 years. I just want to say thank you so much to Cooper Union, Stephen, Chris, Haley for believing in this project, to everybody who lives in one of Jessor's buildings that came, and my family. It's just an honor to be here. So Zara, Brad, and I have been working on this project for the past 2 years. I'm coming at this from a historian's lens, Zara, a photographer, Brad as a practicing designer. So we all have differing interests and approaches. But the reason that we're here tonight after 2 years of so much work is to talk about a really incredible architect who I don't believe has gotten enough credit. His name is Herman Jessor. In 1976, the Cooper Union Board of Trustees credited Jessor with designing housing for more New Yorkers than any other architect, which is just remarkable. And it's interesting to compare this quote to something a wonderful critic from London named Owen Hatherley. In 2024, Owen said, Jessor is the most important radical architect you've never heard of. So I know that a lot of people here have heard of Jessor, but can I just get a show of hands? Who is here that is familiar with his work? Okay, great. Okay, so it's about 50-50. Great. So we're so happy to be able to amplify and showcase that work further. So now Zara is going to talk about, Zara she's here from, she splits her time between Vienna and Berlin, but she's going to talk about how she ended up in New York.
Thank you. Thanks. And yeah, I want to start saying thank you for the opportunity to exhibit here at Cooper Union. Thank you, Stephen and Chris, also for the whole organization. I was in Berlin when we communicated all the exhibition. So thank you also for the production and the installation of the photographs. I just came from Berlin, and I was so happy to see how beautifully it is installed and also how it's embedded in the whole studio life and university everyday life, which I really like. Thank you also to Brad and Katie Ladd, part of our team with whom we created this exhibition. Yes, so I'm shortly going to introduce myself. As you said, I studied architecture in Vienna and then also photography in Vienna. And in my work, I usually have long-term projects where I research with my camera about a certain place or a topic. So sometimes these projects run over several years, and I return to the place. I build up also a relationship to residents and document changes also. So mostly the topics of my work is, like Stephen said, large-scale architecture and also infrastructure. And I'm always fascinated by the scale and this utopian notion that these places were built with. And I'm always interested in the social life within these large-scale structures. So how's the everyday life, and how do people live, work in these large-scale structures? Where do they meet? Are there community spaces? So I will now start showing you a 4-year project I did in Vienna about this housing called Alt-Erlaa for 10,000 residents. So that's something I did prior coming to New York. And I will show you a 10 minutes photo film I did in 2017 that is a combination of my analog photography and some conversations I had with the residents.
Also was für mich einen besonders hohen Stellenwert hat, ist das Dachbad. Also am Nachmittag vom Büro heimkommen, sich entspannen, Kleider ablegen, Badegard anziehen, mit einem Buch oder Rätselheft auf eine Stunde hinaufgehen, abkühlen, runterkommen. Das hat für mich eine Qualität, die bis in den Winter hineinreicht.
Wir nutzen die Sauna, wir nutzen hin und wieder das Hallenbad, wir nutzen die Clubs. Wir sind Mitglied im Freizeitclub, wo es also Kabarettvorführungen gibt. Wir gehen regelmäßig im Foto-Video-Club, wobei die verlangen eigentlich nur die Mitgliedschaft von jenen Leuten, die also die Einrichtungen dort nutzen, um ihre Videobänder zu. Wir sind also eigentlich nur Konsumenten der Videos und nützen und kaufen ihnen halt dort im Buffet Getränke und Brötchen ab.
Ein ganz wichtiger Punkt ist die 24-Stunden-Hausbetreuung. Wenn irgendwas nicht in Ordnung ist, kann ich über die Sprechanlage im Lift sagen, da funktioniert eine Neonröhre nicht, eine Stunde später ist es gerichtet. Du hast hier nicht das Problem, dass Dinge irgendwie abgewohnt, abgefuckt, kaputt werden. Es ist ganz wichtig, dass ein ganzes Heer an Angestellten da ist, um das optisch und technisch in Schuss zu halten.
Den König, Herz-Dame,
Das ist der Bogen.
Herz-Dame,
Achso, Herz-Dame, jetzt schlafen.
Pik-Dame,
Okay, so kann man das auch, kann man sich auch festhalten. Gut, dann fangen wir mal hier und die Antwort aus. Wie ist der Stadtteil Dresden liegt? Und dann geht die zur Steigen Musik.
also die Lebensqualität, die man sich als Familie schafft,
dadurch, dass man die Infrastruktur da hat, ist unwiederbringlich sozusagen. Also das hat man nirgends. Am Land nicht. Am Land muss man rumfahren mit dem Auto, dort in den Ballettkurs, da in den Kurs, da in die Schule, in den Kindergarten. Also ich sage einmal, das, was ich mir als Frau an Zeit hereingespielt habe, weil wir da gewohnt haben, weil ich halt, wenn wir baden gegangen sind, sind wir eine halbe Stunde raufgefahren, dann sind wir runtergekommen, weil einer von der Schule heimgekommen ist, der nächste ist irgendwo zum Kurs gegangen oder im Nachmittagsunterricht und die Freizeit, die ich dadurch gewonnen habe, nur durch die Architektur und die Infrastruktur, die da vorhanden ist, die hätte ich nirgends gehabt.
Es gibt ja eine Liste, eine Warteliste für Wohnungen, wo über 900 Anmeldungen drauf sind von Fremden, die hier einziehen wollen. Ne? Aber natürlich schaut man auch, dass es, wie man so schön sagt, in der Familie bleibt, in der Alt-Erlaa Familie. Die Wertschätzung ist natürlich ganz eine andere. Von jemandem, der hier immer schon wohnt, der hier aufgewachsen ist, der hat Bezug zu den Ganzen. Ne? Und die werden natürlich bevorzugt.
Okay, back to the presentation. All right, yeah, so Alt-Erlaa is housing for middle income for 10,000 residents in the outskirts of Vienna. And there's a very high satisfaction rate amongst the residents, with over 95% who declare to be happy, which is the highest in Vienna. And I was always fascinated by the discrepancy of what I've heard about Alt-Erlaa before, because I heard, how can you live there? It's a inhuman scale, it's ugly. And on the other side, when I started to visit residents, the residents who tell me how they cannot imagine living anywhere else. So when I met architect Harry Glück, and his last name Glück actually means, when you translate it, happiness, I asked him about his concept of Alt-Erlaa. Of course, he mentioned also Le Corbusier was one of his inspirations, and he talked about the concept of stapled single-family houses. So from outside, it looks very massive, but when you're inside and on the balcony, and actually I moved in there now, so when I'm on my balcony, It is very private, so you don't see your neighbor left or right. There's over 30 different floor plans, and the stories vary from 1 to 2 stories. Each apartment has a balcony or a terrace. He talked also about the importance to be close to green. So either on the balcony you have your plants, or also between the blocks you have this car-free park. The closeness to water. I will go here first. There's these rooftop swimming pools. There's 7 of them. So on all of the blocks, on each block, there's a rooftop swimming pool. And Harry Glück told me he sees the swimming pool kind of like a meeting point, like in a village, like the church, more or less, where you meet the others from the village, where you talk also about, I don't know, latest news, exchange recipes. And you also talked about how you cannot come there with a car, like you cannot see if the other one is driving a Mercedes, or so there's not so much a social status visible. You come there only with your bathing suit. Also, he was a good negotiator, because he talked about how this infrastructure for the water is also being used for the fire, in case of fire. And also, of course, good view, fresh air, which was generally important in modernism, and the possibility for community he talked about. So this terraced form, when it does this, it would be too steep for the apartment. So in the belly of the building, there are these spaces that are cut off from daylight that we just saw in my film. So these are used for storage, for indoor playgrounds, indoor swimming pools, and these 33 clubs that were formed by the residents, so by initiatives by the residents. So they were all empty and given also empty to the residents. And in the 70s, 80s, all these community spaces formed. These spaces, as you saw in the film, they have no natural light. They have very low ceilings. They have these technical tubes visible. It gets very hot in the summer. So it's not necessarily spaces. We would learn in architecture school how to design a space or a community space, but here they're used so vividly. So it really raises the question, what makes a good community space in the end? And also, what can you do as an architect? So these spaces are actually also used. Yeah, so this was the work I did prior to coming to New York. I had an artist residency in 2023 here in New York. And then I started looking already back from Vienna. What can I research about? Is there something similar maybe in New York? And I found out about Co-op City. And Co-op City is the largest co-op in the US with around 40,000 residents. And similar to Alt-Erlaa, it had also this concept of a city within a city. So it has its own newspaper. Residents brought also this newspaper Co-op News. Has 3 shopping malls, a cinema, high schools, medical centers, middle schools, and even an own power plant to produce its own power. So it's even self-sustained. And I read also online that it is similarly popular and that there's almost no vacancy. So when I asked my New Yorker friends, do you know Co-op City? All of them said, well, from driving by, which was also similar to Alt-Erlaa. There is a subway driving by, and most Viennese know Alt-Erlaa from driving by and thinking, what is this? Co-op City, so my New Yorker friends, they know it from the I-95, I think, no, that passes Co-op City. So when I came to New York, I just went there. This is also my method generally in my projects, that I just go to a place, I try to catch a certain atmosphere. I spend a lot of time there, approach people, talk to people I meet to get an insight. And it felt also very familiar, I must say, to Vienna. in terms of that there's also this utopian atmosphere from the large scale, and that it was also extremely well maintained, I thought. There's a combination of 34 high-rises and then also 3-story townhouses in between. And the reason I approach residents and why it's so important for me is because I think really these are the experts of the built architecture. After 40 or 50 years of these buildings, you really get an insight of how the original design was adapted, how it succeeded or also failed. And back then, I focused my work on the power plant it's function, how Co-op City is functioning and maintained from an infrastructural point of view. I got a tour inside, and they told me also that they have such a close relationship with the residents that sometimes if the electricity doesn't work, they just got a call from someone directly to the power plant. And as I said, I noticed also how well maintained everything was. There's 1,000 people responsible for maintaining Co-op City, for cleaning, repairing. And we talked to one of them in the hallway. You see also a video. It's an interview with resident Noel Ellison, who was general manager of Co-op City, and what was he called? Mr.
He's the unofficial mayor of Co-op City.
Yeah. And he told us that he exchanged every single window.
Yeah. Toilets, and whenever the state demanded that, new building codes or requirements be implemented, he would be the one going to every single unit, making sure that it was in compliance. So he knows everybody. Everybody knows him.
Yes. So that also is like an open research question throughout my work. This how much does maintenance also play a role in the success of the architecture? Along this work, I met Dan, who introduced me to the whole spectrum of Jessor's architecture. And together we decided to document a selection of 11 housing developments across the city, from the Bronx to Queens, to Manhattan, to Brooklyn. One detail that touched me right away when you introduced me about Jessor's designs was that he designed the apartment layout in that way that you can cross-ventilate for those who cannot afford the AC. And these values and position towards what housing should be, namely a human right, felt very familiar to the concepts of housing I was already familiar with from Vienna. Not only Alt-Erlaa, but also lots of municipal buildings in Alt-Erlaa, such as Karl-Marx-Hof. And when I was standing here, for example, the first time in the Amalgamated in Manhattan, but also in the Amalgamated in the Bronx, I really felt like I was in a municipal building in Vienna. And I thought, what is it? Is it the details, the courtyards, the path, the little path in between the houses, or because it's also so community oriented? So I'm going to just click through some images. We visited all of them together, Dan and I. She's here.
What is this?
Penn South. We approached residents. We got a tour here in Penn South. We got a tour. And like I said, like I mentioned, I'm interested to, you wanted to take a picture? I want
a picture of myself.
And I'm always interested in catching an atmosphere, something that cannot be shown in text or in drawings, and next to the form. The human side, basically, the usage, the art apartments, community spaces. This is the ceramics space in Penn South, or also self-initiated dynamics, such as this community garden in Penn South. the kitchen in Pan South.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
Yes, activities.
Yeah.
But also the entrances, details, the materials I was interested in. This is in the Bronx, amalgamated houses. And the wood shop. And the community space, they were playing bridge. And there is a community space that is used for events.
There used to be proms there and dances. And
Rochdale Village in Queens.
no relation.
And their event space, their concert hall. And in Starrett City, which is now Spring Creek Towers in Brooklyn. And we met these gentlemen who played domino. And I think I've seen in almost all of these developments this hallway in the ground floor in Warbassa houses in Brooklyn. Yes, that's it from my side. Dan.
Thanks so much, Claire. Yeah, so working with Zara and Brad and our friends and collaborators has been a pleasure. It's wonderful to see New York City through your lens coming from Vienna. So I'm going to spend the second half of this lecture talking about the architect of these buildings, Herman Jessor. There's some questions to keep in mind. I'm going to try to answer to what extent did he shape New York City, and why we're interested in revisiting him today in 2025. So I don't think this is a radical thing to say, but New York City has a housing problem. New York City is extremely expensive. As of this year, the median price for a one-bedroom rental apartment is $4,300. The median home price in New York City is $782,000. None of this is, affordable to folks who work on minimum wage or have the median household income of just under $80,000. That is not good. So I'm going to talk very briefly about some of the things that I like to cover as a journalist. I write a lot about the demolition and privatization of public housing and cooperative housing in New York City. The story that's to the left, Saving Section 9, is about a massive demolition project happening in Chelsea, just a few blocks from here, where over 2,000 publicly operated homes are going to be demolished and turned into mixed-use developments, essentially condos. Which in my opinion is a travesty. So I also cover a lot of the protests that people attend to stop that from happening. Recently, just a few months ago, the activist artist group More Art worked with residents of Fulton and Elliott Chelsea houses to stage this protest art demonstration. One person said in a testimony, "I will chain myself to the building before I let them demolish my home." Just because I believe in naming names. The real estate company behind this project is related. The architects are Powell, Cook Fox, and it's not just them. It's a lot of people engaging in this kind of work in New York City. And so this is a protest that I covered a few weeks ago, where people were calling upon Mayor Eric Adams to stop this from happening. I also recently interviewed New York City mayoral candidates, including Zoran Mamdani, Zolnir Mairi. Just with the question in mind, I asked every single one of them, how are you going to solve the housing crisis? This is an important quote that I think we should keep in mind when we talk about this. It's from somebody who's not running, but he represents the Lower East Side, Christopher Marte. He said something which I believe to be true. New York City already has enough market rate housing. It's lacking in social housing. And so this is another development underway today that I think makes Jessor's story pertinent as well. There are decision makers in Albany talking about building what's called the Social Housing Development Authority, which would basically be a state-backed housing construction organ, which I think is great. This is something that an assembly member from Queens, Zoran Mamdani, supports. In this interview I did with Zoran, he said, "What makes our campaign distinct is that we believe there is a clear and critical role for the public sector to play in constructing homes across New York City. And that role will deliver 200,000 permanently affordable, union-built, rent-stabilized homes to New Yorkers who currently cannot afford to find anywhere to live on the market." So he's talking about the public sector getting back involved in housing construction, something that hasn't happened in this country in a very long time. So this is the sort of position that we take in this project. I am of the opinion that the affordability crisis is not a game of supply and demand. Systemic problems require systemic solutions the free market cannot and will not fix. We have let the free market, try to plug the housing crisis for so long, and look where it's gotten us. $782,000 median home prices. So why are we talking about Herman? Because he was prolific. So the total amount of cooperative housing units New York City has today is 357,905. Between 1921 and 1980, Herman oversaw the design of over 40,000 of those units. That constitutes 11% of New York City's total supply, which is just remarkable. In terms of precedents and comparisons, there's really two that come to mind. The Louis Dacier plan of 1924 yielded 38,000 homes in Paris. The interwar years in Vienna yielded just over 60,000 socially operated housing units. So it's really just almost unparalleled in the United States, the extent to which this architect was able to build and deliver. So these are the list of the 11 developments that Zara mentioned. He built in the Bronx, in Manhattan, in Brooklyn, in Queens. Brad, actually, if you want to talk a little bit about sort of the urban design element and the mass scale that Jessor was operating on, it'd be great.
Yeah, sure. So I'll talk really briefly. So Jessor worked from the 1910s, basically, when he began working for Springsteen and Goldhammer, up until really the 1980s when Spring Creek Towers was completed. And so I think you could say, as you said earlier, his work spanned both the kind of like duration of the modern movement, but also kind of the duration of the labor movement. And so when he gets started working, he's working the kind of like smallest projects up at the very top of the map, Shalom Aleichem, and amalgamated houses and United Workers Association houses. Those are all basically buildings that are riffs on the kind of like general Bronx apartment house type, which his office was kind of like comfortable with making. So in the 1920s, you had the only kind of housing that was being built in the 1920s was luxury apartment houses and tenements, low income, like I wouldn't even call it low income housing. It's tenements.
Yeah.
And so when organized labor began to have the resources to experiment in developing their own housing, limited resources, they went to these architecture offices and basically hired them to produce buildings that looked like general apartment buildings. And Jessor and his office, Springsteen and Goldhammer, would iteratively innovate in the type. So they would kind of like take this normal building and morph it to provide additional community spaces, organize them around courtyards, kind of shoehorn in community spaces, club rooms, theaters, extra spaces, etc. What I don't want to get too into details on.
And Brad will also be able to walk people through the brilliant map that's outside.
Yeah. But this is in the 1920s. By the time that the New Deal comes into force, it supercharges the labor union's ability to develop projects at a huge scale. It provides enormous resources to redevelop the city and to buy property at the periphery of the city, which is undeveloped. So after the 1940s, when Abraham Kazin becomes involved and his union develops the UHF, which is the development wing of his union, they are able to become a kind of political player and place kind of political leverage on state organs, whether it's New York State, whether it's New York City, or the federal government, as if they were a kind of economic sector, like a car manufacturer or a utility or something else. So they were able to negotiate, get Mitchell-Lama Act passed, which meant that the unions were then able to build at a kind of massive scale. And so that's why you kind of see at the periphery these larger projects, Co-op City, Rochdale Village, Starrett City, which are the later projects, are built at this very ambitious scale. Jessor and Kazin become a kind of collaborator with Moses. They both see them in the other, a willing collaborator to get projects done. So Moses can look to the unions and say, there's somebody who has the financing and has the kind of like political will to do a project. So I can, negotiate with them to sell properties. And also I can develop the infrastructure to get there. I can develop help develop the utilities to get there, build the expressways, et cetera. So what's interesting to me when I started putting this drawing together was, just wanting to get a kind of like 40,000 foot in the air view of all of the work that he's done, which reveals this story of Jessor experimenting, at the beginning of his career at the periphery of the city where there's cheap land, moving back into the center of the city where the unions that are funding his work want to kind of like reinvent the dilapidated, crowded slums of the Lower East Side and of Midtown, and then would go back out to the periphery of the city and redevelop an entire new kind of like urban vision at the periphery. And so what I'll conclude in saying is that what is kind of interesting to me about his work is the manner in which, the time period in which this was happening was concurrent with the kind of development of the hegemonic American suburb. So like Levittown is happening at the same time that Jessor is building his project. And so at the time that this is happening, there isn't a clear kind of identity to the American suburb yet. There's a lot of shared kind of ideas about quality of life, what the buildings should be like, what living in them should be like. But there's differing opinions on how they should be, those societies should be formulated and operated and developed. So and it's also kind of interesting to us today to understand that most of these developments are still working more or less the way that they were intended.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Greg. Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit more about, so Brad mentioned some of the clients that Jessor was working for. So the way to break this down, there was a pre-war funding and client structure and a post-war client and funding structure. What made the early Jessor buildings possible was what's called the 1926 Limited Dividend Law. That was legislation passed by L. Smith that allowed for the state to subsidize social housing. But there was also a private company, the Metropolitan Life Insurance Company, that was also actively financing affordable housing at that time. And so what happened was, unions like the International Ladies Garment Workers Union. We also just passed the 114th anniversary of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. That's It was the International Ladies Garment Workers Union that was representing those workers. So that's important to keep in mind. There were also the United Workers Association and the Amalgamated Clothing Workers Union. So these were the clients that were getting the loans from either the state or private entities, and then financing Springsteen and Goldhammer and Jessor to work. So after the war, subsidies came from two places, from the federal government in the form of Title I, 1949 Housing Act, as well as the 1955 Mitchell-Lama Housing Program. I also recently learned that the Lama and Mitchell-Lama was also a Cooper Union alum, so that's pretty special. But so what happened after the war was the creation of the United Housing Foundation, which Abraham Kazin was the chief accountant of. And so the United Housing Foundation is a really important part of this story. The UHF was a coalition of 62 trade unions spread throughout all of New York City. And they basically came together to pool their resources to create affordable housing, but also cooperatively controlled milk distribution, eyeglass distribution, so co-op everything. So Kazin was the kind of business mind behind this humongous infrastructure. And they continued to work with the International Ladies Garment Workers Union, the AFL-CIO. Hillman Houses is named after Sidney Hillman, who founded the CIO, and the Amalgamated Clothing Workers Union. So just to give you a sense of who Herman was as a person, I particularly love this quote. In 1968, Herman said, "The final solution to housing for the masses is that it be a government function such as streets, highways, sewers, water, subways, post offices, etc. It is too vital for the needs of the people to be subject to the profit motive." A little bit about Jessor's politics. In 1991, the last executive director of the United Housing Foundation said in his PhD dissertation at Columbia, Jessor was an unrepentant commie, which I think gets to the point. But so what's really special about this story, too, is that Jessor's office was unionized. They were card-carrying members of the AFL-CIO. Just to kind of come back to my work as a journalist, I also write about the seedling labor movement in architecture today. I spent a lot of time covering this, so this is just really special for me as well. You can almost consider Jessor as like a model office in that sense. So background. Herman Jessor was not born Herman Jessor, nor was he born in New York City. Herman was born in 1894 in the Pale Settlement in a city called Gomel, which is in modern-day Belarus. And his birth name was Herman Jessor. He came to the United States when he was about 10 years old. And through my interviews with the Jessor family, I learned that it was in grade school where Herman Americanized his name, like a lot of Jews at that time. So Jessor became Jessor. And so growing up in New York City, Herman eventually enrolled at Stuyvesant High School. But the amazing thing that Herman did, he was very industrious. During the day, while he was a student at Stuyvesant, at night he was taking engineering courses at Cooper Union. So our protagonist graduated with his engineering degree as a teenager. Just to give you a sense of kind of what was happening politically in the Lower East Side at that time, there was a lot. This is a flyer from 1917, the year Herman graduated, in which Leon Trotsky spoke in the Great Hall. I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with the Lower East Side, but it was a time of revolution. The garment workers were constantly going on strike. This was after the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. The labor movement was just kind of hitting its stride. And so the Lower East Side was very red. And so weren't Herman's first buildings. So this is the first project that he worked on at Springsteen and Goldhammer. This is the Yiddish word for cooperative. And it's in the Bronx. Folks who lived there as a child described it as the dream was to establish a just and close-knit socialist community. And that did not go unnoticed by the authorities. The FBI used to sit in their cars across the street taking notes on whoever came and went. This is something that happens again and again in these developments. So this was one of the more known early Jessor projects, the United Workers Association houses. You can see the hammer and sickle above the door. I don't think you'll find that anywhere else in New York City. But so in 1925, the United Workers Association, who financed the projects, put their intentions very clearly when they said, we want to build a fortress for the working class against its enemies. And they, they weren't coming from nowhere. There were a lot of people escaping squalor on the Lower East Side who were dealing with horrible landlords, the police. It was relentless. And so I think they were appealing to a lot of people in that sentiment. And Steve Payne from the Bronx Historical Society later said, the coops, which is the houses in short, the coops are one of the most remarkable moments of intentional, militant, interracial solidarity in the borough and probably in all of New York City. And it's true, the people who actually frequented the coops before it was privatized were W.E.B. Du Bois, Emma Goldman, Paul Robeson, and oddly Queen Mother Moore. Radical people, which I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with. Pete Seeger was also known to give free concerts for children at the coops. There's this great book that talks about the coops by Vivian Gornick called The Romance of American Communism. There are a few thousand people wandering around America today who became communists because they were raised in the cooperative houses on Allerton Avenue in the Bronx, better known to all who lived their existence as the coops. Now, this is really amazing. So in the thick black line here, you have the coops. The coops are spread across two different buildings divided by Britton Avenue. The people who lived in the coops were so effective at politically organizing, socialists actually started to win elections in New York City. Now, the state establishment did not like that. So what did they do? A nice word called gerrymandering. The reason that the Bronx political map is the way that it is today, and the reason that the 5th district is divided from the 6th district on Britton Street is because they needed to break up the socialist bloc. So they gerrymandered the Bronx that's how effective of a unit, political unit, this mass of people was. And it's really important to note that this was, one of the first instances of desegregated housing in the history of the United States. And so Springsteen and Goldhammer, with Jessor as the chief project draftsman, they were also active in the Lower East Side. Photo to the left is of amalgamated dwellings, which takes direct reference of Karl Marx Hof in Vienna, which Zara is very familiar with. You can see it in the arches. You can see it in a lot of the patterning, but also the social infrastructure, the kindergartens. One last thing I'd like to add about the United Workers Association houses. The first residential building in New York City to have a kindergarten. Herman also interviewed working mothers who were living there to see what they needed. He invited people to, design their own kitchens, and just a remarkable example of collaborative design. So later, Penn South, a massive development where we have friends from tonight. One of the amazing people who lived there is a civil rights activist named Bayard Rustin. Amazing civil rights leader, LGBTQ advocate, and unapologetic socialist. So as the famous March on Washington that started at Penn Station in New York City, Bayard was the reason that they all started at Penn Station was because Bayard, who lived at Penn South, he was the one that led that train ride down to Washington. Rochdale Village, another later Jessor project, is today the world's largest Black majority housing cooperative. Before Co-op City was built, it was the world's largest cooperatively controlled complex. Some early images of Co-op City. So we're about to wrap things up, but now that we've laid out this history, I just want to kind of say how Jessor's later projects were met. Really influential critics like Saibal Mahali-Naji said Co-op City had deadly anti-urbanism. Ada Louise Huxtable said it had uninspired architectural design. And Jane Jacobs said a co-op store like this would fail economically if it had competition. So there's a clear preference for, market rate, everything. This is the most annoying quote. This is from a Yale architecture student in 1968 after seeing Co-op City firsthand. He said, Co-op City was an example of the bleak, inhuman, uninhabitable masses of stone, the products of society so distorted in its values that it can offer nothing but ugliness to its less fortunate members. Ooh. And so I'm wrapping up here with a quote actually by Herman's nephew, Richard, who's with us here tonight. Over the phone last year, this is what Richard told me. His critics never really got it right. He was really hurt by what so many people said. They always overlooked his radical social mission, that of providing good living spaces for working people and good living conditions they couldn't get anywhere else in New York. And this is the last slide. After Herman learned of his Lifetime Achievement Certificate award from Cooper Union, he wrote a letter to Richard saying, "Wow, someone out there likes me." So that wraps things up. Yeah. So we'd love to field Q&A. We'd also like to spill out into the hallway where Zara and I can float around answering any questions. But unless somebody has yeah.
Just interested, who runs the Vienna buildings? Is it a board within those buildings?
So it's owned by the city. It's rental apartments also. And Gesiba, it's in charge of managing it. It's a nonprofit municipal cooperative housing organization. I translated it before. But this Gesiba is 99% owned by the city of Vienna. When you move in there, and I just did, I paid I paid around 7,000 euros as a Finanzierungsbeitrag that I would get back if I would move out 1% less each year. And then it is similarly organized like a co-op, that there is a board, decisions are made in the board. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Some comments, please.
Yeah.
All right. I'm from Co-op City. The residents from inception. In fact, I worked on the Co-op City when it was going up, and I'm on the board of directors. And I just like to clarify something. And I've written many things. And by the way, you have a chance, go on to YouTube and look up City and City. And it spells out everything I may even say today. However, the difference we need to identify is when you said there's 395,000 co-ops.
Yeah.
All right. There's a difference. There's market co-op and non-market. We are Co-op City non-market. The whole essence of Kazar and all those developed unions who initiated these projects, beginning with the about houses in the Bronx and the other houses, was one thing they said: housing is not a co-op commodity. We're going to fix the capital return. In other words, if you move out, you only get back what you put in. You're not going to profit from what you lifted. Your profit is you have decent housing and affordable. Now, let me just give you a little fact. In New York City, in Bronx specifically, the median rental for one-bedroom apartment, can anybody guess? I don't know, you said $4,000.
That was citywide, yeah.
Yeah, but the Bronx, it's about, what did you say? 3,200. And that doesn't include gas and electricity.
Cream lives and works in the Bronx, so yeah.
Right? Less than 4,000, right? In Co-op City, a median carrying charge that they put into rent, if you like, is, would anybody try to guess what it is now? One bedroom.
800, 900.
That's right, $940 a month. Just got an increase. We're not getting an increase. Now, what is now, another thing you need to know. There was move constantly to privatize. Don't be to privatize. You're going to make money. You're going to sell your apartment for $1 billion, whatever, and you live with your children and so forth. We fought against it because it would lock out the very families who moved in. I couldn't move back into privatize. So we fought against that. So now the question is, well, where did we get the income? They say, no, we did not get a dime from the state. We went to rent strikes 13 months because our carrying charges went up by 25%. And we tried to get relief from the state. They didn't give a dime. And so we had to reorganize ourselves. And therefore, now, what is our gain? Our gain is to live in affordable housing. There's one more aspect to it, which is very key. To apply for an apartment, there's a waiting list. This waiting list is non-discriminatory. It's unique, because at the same time that went up, there was Parkchester and starting time, the rental. They refused to integrate. The initial building, first, one of the things precepts of the founders of the housing movement, the progressive housing movement, was non-discriminatory. So today, for example, we are the largest cooperative in the country. We're the largest affordable middle-income families with it. It's the largest integrated community in the country. All the Mitchell-Lama developers have to follow the same regulation. That is, they have to have non-discriminatory waiting list, and the income is limited, and the sale of the apartment is based on what say. But people move out, only get what they paid in. So today we can indicate that the Mitchell-Lama houses, there's about 105,000 units still left on the market. Some of them privatized, are the most integrated middle-income communities in the country.